1979. A commercial towing vehicle called the Nostromo is on its way back to Earth. The ship's computer, Mother, awakens the crew from stasis after it detects a transmission from a nearby moon called LV-426. Upon investigating, the ship's executive officer, Kane, discovers a strange, derelict alien ship.
Can you see anything?
A cave of some sort, but I don't know, but it's like the goddamn tropics in here.
Deep in the bowels of this ship is a hot, humid chamber filled with hundreds of eggs.
Wait a minute, this movement.
As Kane approaches one of these eggs, it slowly opens up, and a creature springs out, breaks through his helmet, and attaches to his face. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of alien horror as we discuss Ridley Scott's terrifying masterpiece, Alien. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Munter, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 7th series exploring the evolution of alien, sci-fi, and cosmic horror, and this is part 11. And in this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we are going to be talking about the biggest, the most iconic alien movie of all time, called, of course, Alien, Ridley Scott's classic from 1979. This will be, of course, a spoilerific review. If you haven't seen Ridley Scott's Alien, what the hell do you think you're doing? Go away and watch Alien immediately, and then come back and listen to our discussion. So, joining me to discuss all things Alien, a long-time friend of the pod. She's been here before discussing such classics with me as Rosemary's Baby, Witchfinder General, Dawn of the Dead, Eyes Without a Face, and The Innocents. And she's back to discuss another classic horror film producer and filmmaker. Welcome back to the podcast, Jen Handorf. Hello.
Hello.
How are you, Jen? How's life?
I'm good. I'm living the double vaxxed lifestyle.
Yes.
It's still getting out there, walking the dogs. Didn't get washed away. As of this recording, I've not been washed away in the dramatic weather events of 2021. So holding on tight.
Good to hear. So tell me, Jen, we've got loads to discuss, obviously, with this movie, but let me ask you first of all, more broadly, about the alien subgenre, sci-fi horror and cosmic horror, alien horror, that kind of thing. Are you a fan of this subgenre?
I love it. I really, 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 really do. And it's I like science fiction generally, and I feel like most science fiction has a horror edge to it. I think there's a lot of debate about, is this film science fiction or horror? There are definitely genres that overlap. I think you've probably spoken about before the fact that there very rarely are black and white lines between genres. We've just invented them as ways to discuss these films, not as hard fast rules to store them by. But yeah, so I love it. It enables a set of rules that the audience is completely unfamiliar with, but a set of rules nonetheless.
And aliens are so cool to discuss because they can literally be anything, right? That's the point of them, is that you know, and they're always going to in some way represent a kind of other, I suppose, that is not us. By definition, that is an alien, right? And it's really interesting kind of seeing what that is in different movies across the genre as well, you know?
Well, absolutely that, and I think too the scale of it, because inevitably, you know, if it's a fish out of water on our planet, then they're looking at the entire planet as a novel space.
Yeah.
And similarly, if we're the fish out of water in their environment, everything on their planet is novel. So there's something quite, and it's interesting when we get into the cast of this particular movie, actually, there's something quite uniting about the characters and generalizing towards the audience. Like it doesn't ever feel like they're not about you, these films, because they're about humanity.
It's so true, actually. They give you a kind of humanity on a sort of macro and micro level in a weird way, don't they? I suppose similar to zombie films in a way. I think do that
like apocalypse films in general, where the stakes are and even I suppose, you know, in a way the science fiction is sort of the next step up from the apocalypse film, because in an apocalypse film the stakes are worldwide, and then when you get into space alien films, the stakes are galactic in a way.
Exactly. It's so true. And we've talked already a lot this series about a lot of, you know, there was a real boom of these movies in the 50s, right? And how most of them, 90% of them, the aliens represented communists in some ways or another, right? And the alien, I suppose a little bit like the zombie, a really great allegory monster in a way, right? And it can be whatever we're afraid of probably at any given time.
Exactly.
You know?
Well, it's the other, as you said earlier, so we can just slap whatever. It's a good vessel for that.
Exactly. And, you know, it will be interesting to see what this movie is dealing with in terms of its metaphors, right? But I'm very excited. This is the quintessential, of course, alien horror film. Jen, let's talk about Ridley Scott's Alien.
Final report of the commercial starship Nostromo. Third officer reporting. The other members of the crew, Kane, Lambert, Parker, Brett, Ash, and Captain Dallas are dead. Cargo and ship destroyed. I should reach the frontier in about 6 weeks. With a little luck, the network will pick me up. This is Ripley, last survivor of the Nostromo. Signing off.
Jen, I doubt there's anyone on this planet that doesn't know the story of Alien, but just in case, start us off with a little plot summary.
So I want to say too, for the purpose of this conversation, I want to stick to talking about the film as it was made and pre its release. So, because there's the director's cut as well, which even Scott has kind of got mixed opinions about. So, you know, because this film has become such a behemoth in and of itself, and the franchise has become such a unwieldy beast, and there's retconning and there's, you know, prequels and all this kind of stuff. I'm really fascinated taking this film as it stands on its own before the producers or filmmakers knew how the audience was going to respond to it.
So true. Yeah.
Because I went back and watched it for the first time in ages for this chat. And as I said, I watched the initial cut, not the director's cut, which has additional scenes in it. And I was thinking, if any of you haven't watched the film, or if any of you have very, you know, housemates, whoever, who haven't seen the film before, I highly recommend you just go immediately watch it right now without any other information, because you think you know what it is, but then when you watch it, even remembering it as this archetype, you think you remember what it was, and then you go back to it and you're like, oh wow, this is actually a really straightforward piece. Like it
really is.
It doesn't do anything, you know, as outside the box as you might think it did by its reputation. It just did what it did very well. And so what it did was cowboy truckers meet space straws.
Aha! Yes. Yes.
and it's amazing for all those reasons. So you've got the crew of the Nostromo who are returning from mining planet, bringing back some kind of minerals to Earth. Space truckers, and they get awoken from cryostasis. Let's get our science fiction words correct. They get awoken from cryostasis early because obviously nobody wants to do. I think they say they're halfway through and it's 10 months, so it's a 20-month journey. So they put them to sleep for it. And they get woken because there's an emergency signal. It can't be read. They don't know what it is, but they have a remit from the company they work for. Is it called Whaling Corporation? Do we know it's Whaling Corporation in this film? I'm not sure.
I'm so confused by what I know from the sequels and what I know from this movie. Right? But I think somewhere you see it written. I think it is the Whaling
I wouldn't be surprised. They're cheeky enough that I wouldn't be surprised. But so the Whaling Corp has given them corporation has given the remit to investigate any signal that has the potential to be from intelligent life. And so, despite the fact that none of them are really qualified or wanting to go do it, which is pointed out by themselves, they go check out this signal on a planet. It's dangerous, it's creepy, it's weird. They find an egg. The alien gets back on the spaceship, their spaceship, via this egg. Things go wrong. Lots of people die. There's acid blood. And can I just say too, on my and then Ripley gets away. So that's the film.
Exactly. It's beautifully simple, isn't it? Yeah.
It really is, and it's one of those things too that not only did it borrow, even at the script stage, not only did it borrow from so many tropes and so many, not just films, but also comic books that came before it, that it was really, even Bob Balaban, the writer, says that he didn't steal from anything, he stole from everything. So it's almost a pastiche to start with. And then it became in and of itself so iconic. I mean, the film is called Alien. It's the Alien movie.
It really is.
That we've seen so much that's been borrowed from it or perverted from it or pantoed from it that it's really strange to go back and watch it on its own and realize how as you say, simple it is.
It's wonderful, isn't it? So are you a fan of it generally, Jen? Have you, what's your sort of history with this movie?
Absolutely. You know what? I honestly can't remember the first time I watched it.
Yeah, same here. It's one of those, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's and I think it's one where I would have watched, I think I watched Alien 3 first, and I know that is probably gonna get me not invited back to the podcast ever again, but I think it was literally one of those things where I saw Alien 3 in the cinema when it came out.
Oh yeah,
because somebody for whatever reason it was going to be fun and good, and then after that I saw 1, and then after that I saw 2, and I really think I saw 1 at film school. Which is
so quite late on.
Yeah, no, absolutely, because it was just one of those films that it kind of fell more into the blockbustery kind of blokey realm, and I was doing a lot more of the weirder art house stuff at the time because I was very pretentious as a teenager.
Of course.
But I think going into it, I had already been so aware of the mythology of the franchise, the Queen Alien, the Geiger, Ridley Scott as a master filmmaker, that was already established in my mind before watching them. I cannot tell you how much I envy whoever gets to watch this film blind these days.
Oh my god. It's almost impossible, isn't it? This is in that kind of area of horror, that tier where it's you will know all about it before you see it, surely, just by living on this planet and knowing anything about pop culture. It's like Psycho, it's like Halloween, it's you're going to know certain moments from this film, I think, aren't you?
Exactly. Anyone who can watch the chestburster scene and not know what's coming is genuinely living their best life.
I know, right?
And it's sort of it frustrates me so much that it can, because of its iconic power, it does just permeate everything, much like the face hugger. It snatches on and just keeps feeding you information.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, honestly, going back and watching the first one, and did you have this experience at all where I had really forgotten how little was established? There is no mother alien. We don't know the gender of the alien.
No.
The whole, which I didn't mention when I'm breaking down the narrative, but the whole, he's an android, right? That's the best way to phrase it.
Ash. Yeah.
Ash the android. And I'm sure I'm actually using the wrong robot word, but that's fine.
No, I think it is android. It
is android, is that right?
Yeah.
So, all of that stuff, you think is going to be front and center because that's how you remember it and that's how it presents in the rest of the franchise and how it's discussed. But it super isn't. The majority of the film is just very slow shots of miniatures, and I adore that, and an excellent score.
Well, do you know what? I love this film. I think I don't know how many times I've watched it, but I think it still remains one of the most terrifying films ever. Even I know what's coming, it's still, I find, really, really scary. And but I do remember the first time I saw it, when I was probably a teenager at school, I was actually initially a little bit bored by how slow paced it is at the beginning.
I could see that.
Right?
I could totally see that.
And now I love the pacing, but I think initially when you think, oh, I'm going to go watch this film about these chest bursting, I probably would have been better off watching Aliens, the James Cameron one, at that age. Whereas Alien is so deliberately paced, isn't it? It really takes its time, and it's a while before anything gets going as well,
Well, the 2001 Space Odyssey aspect, the Kubrickian symmetry, slow moving, geometric shapes, the lighting styles, all that kind of stuff. The blue streak filter. This is, I feel like, where lots of people can thank this film for the blue streak filter being sci-fi.
Yeah,
this is really true. The one where it comes. But I feel like all of that comes on the back of the fact that you had so many people contributing their very clear opinions and their very clear visions to this film.
Yes.
And then you had Ridley Scott and his producer Walter Hill, who were both determined not to let the other one fuck it up, which is really the only way I think I can describe that relationship. Yeah. And out the other end comes this brilliant piece, which could have just as easily been a B movie.
Yes. Well, I think the thing about it, right, is, and I know many people have said this before about it, but it is, in many ways, when you look at its influences, when you look at what kind of story it's tackling, this is a B movie done as an A movie, right? It's a B movie wrapped up in a prestige picture.
Well, this is, and you know how much I love to go to the entomology of a film and like how it came together and who the people were who put it together. So the two writers of this, Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett. So Dan O'Bannon had done USC film student, script, classical training. He had done, while still at film school, Dark Star with
John Carpenter. Yeah.
And it started off as a short, and then they kept putting money in it and kept making it longer, and it became a feature. So you have to imagine that Dan O'Bannon is already coming from a place of knowing how to expand a film, starting off with a small idea, adding on to it, making it bigger. He's also used to dealing with the restrictions of a low budget and knowing what he would have done if he could have done more with it.
100%. Because also Dark Star, right, it is a sci-fi kind of alien movie, right? But the alien, I mean, I love that film, and it's very quaint, but because it's such a low budget film, but the alien is basically a spray painted beach ball, right? And it looks ridiculous, but it's a really fun movie. But I think after that happened, I think Dan O'Bannon, reportedly said he wanted to do something like that, but more so. He wanted to do a real serious alien film.
People didn't laugh. John and I went to some theaters to see, and nobody was laughing. I found the experience traumatic. He worked so hard to get a particular audience response, there was nothing. So I scooted way back from comedy after that, because I realized that, among other things, comedy is individualistic. Everybody laughs at something different. But they're all afraid of the same thing. So a couple of years down the line, the idea came to me to do what essentially was a Dark Star stood on its head. Scary.
So you've got Dan O'Bannon on one side, and then you've got Ronald Shusett. And Ronald Shusett, he'd been, he's one of these writers of that era who's really a writer, producer, director. Like he's a get a film made kind of a guy rather than just a focused on any one place, which a lot of people here are. So he'd been licensing films from Philip K. Dick, licensing short stories from Philip K. Dick. He would later do Total Recall, but up to this point, that's what he had been trying to do. He'd been finding short stories that he thought were licensable to be able to be made into science fiction feature films. He saw Dark Star. He thought, this Dan O'Bannon guy has something. I'm going to work with him. Dan O'Bannon had already, he'd been ADing, he'd been second ADing, so he's living on set, he's made an independent film, he knows how films are made and what it takes to get it from script to screen, and he'd written basically what is everything up until they land on the planet where the signal is coming from. He'd written that, and then Ronald Shusett came on board and gave him the Facehuggers. And then from there, they finished the script. And it was meant to be a Roger Corman film initially.
Yeah.
But then Walter Hill, who at this point had really only done like classical westerns and had done bigger stuff, but really only sort of, A- movies, like stuff that was very mainstream, nothing off the beaten path. And they actually, I love this, Walter Hill actually bought it, like sniped it out from Roger Corman. Like they were going to sell it to Roger Corman. That deal was all structured up. Everything was going to happen. And they legitimately stole it off.
Yeah, literally stole it off him as well. And this is also down to the sudden surge of popularity in science fiction too. Obviously, Star Wars the year before, or 2 years before, which had basically changed everything, right? As well as 2001. Suddenly, sci-fi was a bit more respectable. It was a bit more prestigious. It wasn't the Corman movies of the 50s anymore, And so studios were like, "Ooh, a sci-fi script. We'll have that." Like the bigger ones,
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was exactly that. And it was, Corman is no dummy, and he knew exactly how to spot a script. You've got going backwards still. Remember, Ronald Shusett had been optioning things from the likes of Philip K. Dick, who would later become the source material for tons of our classical sci-fi.
Yeah.
So these are all people who have amazing taste, who have seen what is here. These are not people who are studio executives who just pick what's popular. These are all people with great taste. And then it got swooped up and picked up by the studios who know what's popular. And from here, the film takes a really interesting turn development-wise. Because at this point, again, you've constantly got the commercial and the creative sort of helping each other on this film, which is very rarely what they do.
Yeah.
So at this point, Dan O'Bannon had gone out to Paris to work on a draft of Dune.
Yes, this was the Jodorowsky's Dune, right? The kind of film adaptation that never actually ended up happening.
But also, by the way, Dune has sort of ground to a halt.
Yeah.
In the meantime, and my dog has opinions about what's going on here. In the meantime, Dan O'Bannon has become friends with a load of incredible French designers, meeting people like Geiger, who isn't French, but he was in Paris, and all these incredible comic book artists who he was meeting via Dune. So at this point, he's told, we're in production, you're going to go to London, we're going to get this thing storyboarded. And using these comic book artists who he's met via Dune, he creates some storyboards for the film. And now the studio sees these storyboards and says, we could actually have something here. And I believe they doubled the budget at this point, just seeing the storyboards. And then further to that, you've got scenes like... So the scene where Harry Dean Stanton dies, right?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I literally jumped and screamed when the alien came on screen during that scene.
Yeah.
So,
Incredible.
Really, really fun. But you've got this like massively leaky like waterfall in the middle of the spaceship for no reason whatsoever.
There's like chains hanging.
So apparently the producers... I've got constant producer brain. So apparently they said to Scott, this doesn't make any sense. Why is there a big drippy hanging thing in the middle of the spaceship? It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And Scott was just like, it's scary. And they're like, okay, have some money for it. And then the last big one is that the film didn't originally have the sort of fourth act double beat ending where the alien winds up on the escape ship with Ridley. With Ripley. Oh, Ridley Ripley. I'd never noticed that before.
Yeah. That's going to get confusing, isn't it?
But so that was completely suggested by Ridley, the director. Now my brain's going to fall over. And they ended up chunking more money towards them to shoot more things. It was during production that became a suggestion. So, while you do start with this really talented Dan O'Bannon script, you then have it sort of bounce back and forth between people who have a lot of great taste and then back to the creative people and then back to the people who have a lot of great taste and then back to the creative people. And at no point did anybody really say no to anyone, which happens very rarely.
So I had this immediate take on it. The budget at that point was $4.2 million, which at that time, was pretty good because I made the Jewelers for $900,000 all in. And I met with Alan Ladd. I went back to London. I said I'll storyboard the movie because that's what I'm able to do. And I sat there for a month and storyboarded the movie, the way I saw it. And I went back to LA, and the power of the storyboard, we doubled the budget.
It's just amazing, isn't it? The way, the backstory of this and all of the people that came together to make this film what it is. And without any one of them, it could have not happened, you know? So you've got, like you say, Dan O'Bannon, this writer who was wanting to make the horror version of Dark Star, a horror B-movie in the vein of some of those 50s movies that we've already talked about this series, right? He collaborates with Ronald Shusett. Like you said, Ronald Shusett comes up with a lot of the main story beats, like the face hugger. You've got producer Walter Hill and 20th Century Fox, who are dead keen on getting hold of a script like this because it means that they can cash in on Star Wars mania, on sci-fi kind of trends that are coming up at this point. So they're willing to put lots of money into it. You've got this artist, H.R. Giger, who Dan O'Bannon happened to meet in Paris, like you said, who kind of is responsible really for the look and vibe of this film. And then, of course, you've got Ridley Scott, who even, you know, he was a relatively new filmmaker. The studio was willing to put their trust in him. He was somebody that had earned their trust. So when he made decisions like he wanted more money to create the space jockey that was only in one scene, or he wanted to create that ending, that coda on the shuttle, the studio gave him the money to do it, and they helped him realize this vision. Ridley Scott obviously mastered the suspense. He also cast the film. The casting is such an important part of this movie, which we'll get to later. So you've got all of these people, haven't you, sort of coming together, sort of using all of their creative and commercial powers to create this perfect horror movie, this perfect organism like the alien itself.
Yes! Oh, good!
It's such a product of its time and of all of its inspirations too, right? Because you can definitely feel the 2001 element. You can feel even a bit of Star Wars element actually in this, in the way that it's very kind of like working class. It's not making space look like really prestigious in the way 2001 does. It makes it look a bit grimier and dirtier.
Like the Harrison Ford space trucker thing again.
Yeah, exactly. Truckers, exactly. But then there's also Halloween in this, right? There's a slasher format. There's a final girl. You know, Halloween was a huge hit the year before. There's a haunted house element to it as well. And it feels like it's kind of seamlessly brought about 50 different influences together, you know, all in one little film. It so really
is. It's like an excellently made quilt where each patch was also made by someone very good.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always happen. And I think that really is the reason to take the film on its own, because I think when you look at the rest of the series, you know, there's great bits of it, there's not great bits of it, but it's all been done by like a corporate system, so to speak. Like, it's definitely all approved by studio and like put through all of that. And so some of the edges have been polished off, and that's great in some places, but not great in others. And I just think watching this one, you get to see what happens when that chemistry really works.
Absolutely. And Ridley Scott, you know, we should say, what you know, he's had an interesting career, and he's had some not so good movies as well, but he knows how to direct something, doesn't he? He knows how to make something look incredible. He was relatively early in his career at this point. I think he'd made a couple of features, The Duelist, but he had done so many like commercials and things like that, right? Anyone who's done you know, GCSE media studies in the UK will have had to have watched his like Hovis advert from the 70s and stuff, which, you know, made him such a star. But yeah, he again brought so much style, I suppose, to this film as well. I think it's his taste more than, which is really what a director exercises. Like, I'm not sure, you know, we talked about the final scene, which was his edition. I think he had the very strong luck of having a lot of very good collaborators through whom he was able to filter, or you know, whose ideas he was able to filter into this film. Yeah, you look at things like Gladiator, and it's very similar, where the teams behind it are exceedingly talented, and he's acting as a filter for those incredibly talented individuals. And then you see some of his other films, you know, it goes the other direction, where if he doesn't have it to start with, he can't necessarily create it from nothing. The alchemy is not necessarily there. Yeah, so true. He's a good collaborator, and I think he knows how to make things look incredible. He is such a slick director, isn't he? I'm not sure he always quite knows how to spot a good script, you know?
So true.
I mean, we'll talk about the prequels, I'm sure, later, but there are a few stinkers in his career, I think, and it's such a broad range of movies that he's done as well, from Thelma and Louise to The Counselor to that terrible Moses story starring Christian Bale. Like, he does anything and everything, and some of it works, some of it really doesn't, but he always knows how to make a movie look incredible, I think.
And I kind of think performances as well. I think he's good at picking fantastic actors. There's two scenes in this film that struck me as a little odd on a rewatch, and it's one of them is the scene where Ripley goes into the medic lab, med lab, and confronts Ash about what's going on with John Hurt's character. And it's cut so strangely. Like it's looking up at Ash from Ripley's side. And then when it cuts back to Ripley, Ripley is right on the left of frame and just hovering right there. And the audio's weird, and you can really hear the performances. Like, there's no sound design, there's no music. It's really flat, and it feels almost unkind to the actors.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It is weird. Yeah, he makes some interesting choices. So and we're going to touch upon all these points again as we go, but let me start off by... I want to start at the beginning of the film. I think even the beginning is quite striking, right? The first thing we see, before we see any people, before we see any aliens, we see the ship, we see the Nostromo. The first thing you see is like Ridley takes us on like a guided tour of this. It looks like a ghost ship, doesn't it? This empty, dark ship while everyone is still asleep and nothing's happening at this point.
Well, we don't even know that everyone's still asleep. All we know is we're seeing empty space, empty space, empty space. And it starts off in the empty vastness of space, literally just stars, planets. Then it goes into shots of the Nostromo, exterior, nothingness, quietness, no movement. Then we cut to the interior of the Nostromo, and all of this is straight out of the 2001 handbook. Like, it could not look it looks like, offcuts from 2001 at this stage.
Totally.
Until you get to, and even slightly when you get to, there's the first bit of real movement we see is one of those kitsch toys where it's I think they're called dippy birds or something, where it dips its beak into the water and then it sits up and then it dips back down. And that's the first time we see any kind of movement or life on the ship, is this one little dippy bird going. And it's only then that we see these people in pods.
Exactly.
Which now we go, oh, they're in stasis. Mm-hmm. But when people were watching the film originally, that was not in the vernacular.
Totally.
It was creepy and weird.
And it looks like some sort of birth or something, right? Which I'm sure we'll get to. We'll have lots to say about birth and genitals and sex and all this other stuff as we go on, I'm sure. But let me start.
Not even related to the film.
Exactly. But even before we meet them, let me just ask you about the production design, I suppose, the look of this ship. Because again, so important. So many people describe this movie as a haunted house in space, right? Do you agree with that perspective, I suppose, when it comes to the look of this ship?
I mean, yeah, like it looks like an insane asylum. Like it looks like an old Hammer movie location in a lot of ways. The walls almost have a padded cell look to them. Mm-hmm. So you're either in the sort of padded cell areas or you're in the dingy basement areas.
Yeah. That looks like some sort of gothic dungeon or something like that almost.
Yeah, none of it is welcoming. When it's clean, it feels sterile and imprison-y, and when it's grotty, it feels like something's lurking behind, about to get you.
Yeah, and I think because of the way it's lit too, there are loads of dark areas, and so it feels like every frame is filled with areas where something could be hiding, right, as well. Like you couldn't easily spot someone or something in some of these like crevices and nooks and crannies in these corridors and rooms.
And it's all liminal spaces. Spaces that you move from, hallways, corridors, and constantly with the sci-fi doors. Like every scene has a door opening and closing. There's always what's coming through, are we safe, all this kind of thing. And they talk obviously a lot about I feel like quarantine is a word that stands out in our minds more than it used to. Which is another interesting context of which to watch this movie is the when you start to go, well, none of them are wearing masks during this quarantine.
Oh my God. Well, this is the other thing that we'll get to with this film, is that it's not just kind of like glossy sci-fi. There's a real kind of body horror disease disease, germy kind of element to it as well, right? About this thing kind of infecting bodies and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of fluids and sweat and like, it's quite a moist film.
It's a very moist film.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's, that goes back to the rainy chains chamber.
Yes.
It's like
everything's dripping and
it's a lot wetter in space than I realized.
Yeah, exactly. This is something you don't get in 2001, which is so sterile. Right?
I've just realized in Hitchhiker's Guide why he tells you to always bring a towel now.
Exactly.
It's just because space is damp.
It's so damp. It's so damp. So we get our main characters, emerge in their little sort of white panties in these pods, and again, Ridley Scott swears that there was no kind of subtext or symbolism or anything going on in this film, but it feels like a film so obsessed with kind of particularly the human bodies and everything right from the get-go, right, the first time we see them.
Well, and this is one of the things that I say when he acts like a filter. I don't know if he'd necessarily know what his collaborators were using as references other than seeing and signing off on the finished product. And it's one of those things where he knew that these artists were there. He knew that these artists were bringing these images, but they've made this film so quickly. How much is he taking in, or even being told about? Oh, well, I designed this way because it reminds me of the. No, do you like it? Yes, we're doing that one. Great.
So true. So true.
So I do buy it when he says, from his perspective, it doesn't have that subtext in it. But I don't think that just because he didn't put it there, it's absent entirely.
Yeah, you're so right. And it's all just there, isn't it? And it all comes together so seamlessly, I think, this idea of, a lot of people, I'm skipping ahead now, but a lot of people talk about that moment at the end when Sigourney strips down to her underwear as well in the shuttle. But I personally, and I would love to hear your perspective on this, but I don't really see any of these scenes of them coming in or out of hypersleep as sexual in any way. It more to me makes them look vulnerable more than anything, I suppose, like vulnerable to this monster.
I think the initial ones feel like medical and balanced and all that kind of thing. On the rewatch, my initial reaction, yes, Sigourney Weaver is hella fit, and let's just applaud, a woman for looking that beautiful and being happy to share it with the world. But it definitely felt objectifying. Like I thought, ooh, she's fit.
Yeah. Okay.
So it doesn't at the beginning, I feel like it's much more medical and sterile and this kind of thing. And I think that's probably partially because of the tone and the tension that's being built up in those moments. When we see her disrobe at the end, it's after a big bit of relief.
Yes.
So I think we're looking at it in a different way.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And there is definitely like her underwear folds, but she's also got plumber butt. And she's like, there's a lot that is really good about it. So do I think it's objectifying? I think yeah, but I don't think it takes it too far. And I think it serves its purpose in the way that, this sexual titillation is following these very scary, dramatic running around scenes.
Yeah.
So
it's really, and I think it doesn't, I feel like it also kind of works, obviously, just logically with what she's doing. And also, there's something about it. It reminds me of when I talked with Jamie Graham about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which we also kind of both agreed that it almost feels like an entirely sexless film, Texas Chainsaw. And like, even though the all of the characters, male and female, are very kind of skimpily dressed, it's boiling hot Texas, but there are shots of legs or butts or whatever that somehow don't look so much sexual as they do like we're looking at these people like they are these vulnerable slabs of meat for the slaughter.
Yeah,
almost.
I was going to say,
I mean?
with Texas Chainsaw, it's very much like about cuts of meat.
Yeah,
in the way that it was
and it's not quite as overtly that in Alien, but I think there's something of it for me that I just think of her as suddenly she looks incredibly
very
vulnerable. Yeah.
I'm down with that. And I have to say too, I have to give like some special recognition to her jumpsuit, because I had never noticed the corsetry detailing on the back of her jumpsuit. I watched it in 4K this go around, and it's got, honestly, the whole back of it has been like ribbed and stitched and laced in order to give her the flat, effortless shape at the front of that jumpsuit. And I highly recommend, if costume folks, it's not about the front of the jumpsuit, it's about the back of the jumpsuit in the few scenes that we get to see that.
That's really interesting.
The work that was put into making that boxy shape look good on her figure, I think, was really interesting.
What you say, if you got any biscuits on there?
Here's some cornbread.
I am cold.
Still with us, Brett? Anything so bad, man?
Right.
Yeah. I feel dead. Anybody ever tell you look dead, man?
So let's rewind back to first meeting our characters then, our crew, right? So we've got Dallas, Ripley, Lambert, Brett, Kane, Ash, and Parker. And when we first meet them, they come out of hypersleep. Then they're at this kind of breakfast, right? They're all sitting, chatting. What do you think of this introduction to these characters, Jen? I mean, I think there's a really interesting scene here where it sounds very off the cuff. It sounds very almost Robert Altman-like. They're all talking over each other, and the camera's kind of swooping around the table and giving us a glimpse at each one of these characters initially, right? But what do you think of this kind of introduction, I suppose, to all of these characters?
Yeah, it feels very much like the teacher's lounge.
Yeah,
like at the first day of school.
Like a staff room.
Yeah,
it's so true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I love the like I think it's different grains that they're eating, but I love the look of it as sort of Tupperware cereal.
Yeah.
And it looks very, I love the way you say breakfast, because in space meals have no meaning.
No, and there is no time, is there? It's like
exactly.
Yeah,
But yeah, there's this sort of communal aspect to it. You can see the cliques. You can see that some people get along better than others. But and immediately you've got the Harry Dean Stanton and Yaphet Kotto talking about money, and you get the hierarchy is immediately established. It's great. This is one of the places where Dan O'Bannon really shines. He immediately sets up the dynamics of these people with what feels like non-expositional dialogue,
100%.
but is in fact quite expositional. 100%. It's just very casual. It's great.
It's incredible. I love that about it. And again, I know we're trying not to touch too much on the sequels, but I think what really happens, particularly in the prequels, is that you find none of these characters talk like human beings. They talk like exposition machines or something, or they're all like very much talking about why are we here? Who created us and all this. Whereas like here we've just got a bunch of like blue collar workers talking about money or practicality, and they're all,
exactly
like they're bickering and they just feel like just regular, like you said, they're space truckers. They feel like regular human people having regular conversations,
And in a way, Alien is like the working class film of the franchise.
Yeah, it is.
And then immediately it starts to get, corporate and higher educated and posh and like, art house but it never is. It works best as a space trucker movie.
Yeah, it's so good. There's something really lovely about it and hats off to Dan O'Bannon's script really, because it almost feels unscripted. And I think that's a really lovely compliment in a way for a script like this, because it feels just so real and natural,
Well, and I think too, a lot goes to the actors and the editing there.
Yeah.
That for the preparations in the film, Scott wanted a cast who he could really let do their own thing, who could be autonomous and who he wouldn't have to micromanage too much. So he spent a lot of time running conversational improvisations with them before they started filming. And then when he got on set, very much focused more on the production design and the shots and the staging, and with the notion of just letting them run their characters. So apparently there's pages and pages of backstory for every character, and I don't know if that's available anywhere, but rumor has it it's I would imagine Ash's would be the shortest.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's so true. Ash is the one character. He's how later characters in the franchise talk, but there's a reason for why he talks like this in the first one, because he's a robot.
Exactly. I was going to say, like, the future characters, it becomes impossible to tell who the robot is, because the future franchise characters, because they all seem to have that same kind of pat style of dialogue.
Yes.
And as much as I love some of those performers, it just becomes very panto, a much more panto version of itself.
Yeah, when you've got like Michael Fassbender playing the flute with another Michael Fassbender and everything. Amazing. But yeah, I love all of these guys, and I think maybe we should talk a bit more about Ripley at this point, because what's really interesting, again, it's impossible to watch this film in a vacuum with no prior knowledge, right? But if you go in completely blind, you're not necessarily going to assume that Ripley is the star at this point. Do you know what I mean? She kind of slowly emerges as the hero, kind of organically. But I think, given the conventions, you might be led to believe at the beginning that maybe Dallas, Tom Skerritt's character, is going to be the sort of hero, the captain, or even John Hurt. I don't know.
Well, exactly, and I think that's again another credit to the script, that the characters are all very well balanced at the front, and it's really, I think you don't have Ripley come to the foreground until, because her job is also, you can tell Ash is the medical officer, you can tell Yaphet Kotto and Harry Stanton characters are the engineers, you can tell Tom Skerritt is the pilot. Kind of don't know what Veronica Cartwright or John Hurt do, but that's fine. But Ripley, Sigourney Weaver's character, Ripley, seems to be maybe a second officer, or maybe a pilot, or maybe, but it's never really solidified where she sits in the hierarchy. You only know that she's above the two engineers who are the lowest of the low, and it's never quite clear where she sits otherwise. You know that she's promoted to captain when the captain dies, but also half the crew have died at that point, so you're not really sure if she's skipping the queue or not. But yeah, the first scene that she really comes to the foreground is when she goes to inspect the work of the engineers. And she calls them on trying to make it seem like it's more broken than it is. They're faffing about, they're trying to hold them ransom to give them more shares, say, well, we can't possibly get it to work unless you give us more money, and she talks them around. She won't be held hostage. And it shows her sort of backing away into the fog at the end of the scene, which is quite interesting to show her character have this sort of power.
Hey, Ripley, I want to ask you a question. If they find what they're looking for out there, does that mean we get full shares?
Don't worry, Parker, you'll get whatever's coming to you.
Look, I'm not going to do any more work. We get this straightened out.
Brett, you're guaranteed by law to get a share.
What?
Why don't you just fuck off?
I get the feeling that most of the people on the ship don't like Ripley as well. Do you like, even before she refuses to let them back on the ship because of quarantine procedure, even before then,
love that.
You get the feeling that she's, what you might call a bit of a job's worth, maybe, right? And the rest of the crew don't really like her for that reason.
She's the by the books one. She's absolutely the by the books one, which is why she knows, she quotes all the command guidelines and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, she's got a definite second officer who is stricter than anybody wants, kind of a thing. Yeah. And maybe and this is really interesting because, of course, famously, Ripley wasn't written as a woman in the script. It was a man. They just cast Sigourney Weaver in the role. But there is something of it now that's added to that, where you almost get the feeling like she's this woman in this slightly higher position than the rest of the crew, and constantly feels like she has a fight on her hands because of that, I think. And there is that feeling to it, I think, that like people don't respect her when they should, And she's the youngest by a decent stretch. Well, I mean, she's only 3 years younger than Veronica Cartwright. She's something like 20 years younger than Yaphet Kotto at this stage. Maybe even more. So as an actor, there's a bit of that dynamic there too. And I think some of this is what the performers brought to it that Scott didn't bring, because just watching the way Scott directs women, I've not seen him recreate that kind of performance in another actor before. Or since, I should say. And Sigourney Weaver is so watchable, and whether she's doing broad comedy like Ghostbusters or like femme fatale thrillers like Copycat, she brings a lot to the characters she's
brilliant.
creating. So I think really, you know, we've got to give her props for that, because this is another myth too that I always struggle to find veracity in, is whether the character was written as a man or just an asexual being.
Yeah, just a person. Yeah, just a person.
Exactly. I think they were written as genderless characters or sexless characters. But then someone told me that there was a sex scene that got cut. But I'm glad that got cut.
But you're right, you know, that's true, actually. I think it wasn't necessarily that Ripley was written as a man, it was just that it was a character called Ripley. I don't think we know that the character's called Ellen, do we, until the sequel? So it's just Ripley, Dallas, Lambert. These were non-gendered characters. Although it's hard to see that with Veronica Cartwright's character, don't you think? Because you're right, I think there was a cut scene where she talks about having slept with a member of the crew. Just the way that her character is written, I think it's a bit of a shame with her character, and I'm sure we'll get into it later, but compared to Ripley, she's a bit more of a kind of two-dimensional hysterical character, isn't she, I think?
And I wonder too, again, how much of that is her energy, because the you know, talking about mythology of the making of the film, there's the story of how they didn't know the blood was going to explode on the first shot of the chest burster scene. Now, rewatching this with my husband, Dan was just like, well, how would they obviously knew it was going to do that. It's half a fake man and a table and all this. And so we've decided, and again, if you watch the cuts, it's so classic, but actually the continuity is terrible. Yeah. She gets splashed with blood, then you go back, then she's completely clean and not even worried. And then she gets splashed with blood a second time and screams again. And we forgive it because we're in the moment. But apparently the first take of her, that first shot of her being splashed with blood before she gets clean again, she was not expecting. Right. And I think you can see in her expression that she's just a bit big and hysterical in the way that she responds to things. Yeah. So
she's amazing though, Veronica Cartwright. I think she's brilliant, and actually she brings that horror movie vibe to it, don't you think? Like, she obviously, this is somebody that had previously been, she was in The Birds when she was a child. She had been in Invasion of the Body Snatchers as well the year before, and she behaves like a character in a slasher film or something as well. Right?
She's almost a character actor, but like I watched Witches of Eastwick recently, and her hysterical church-going woman is like, you see, again, if you look at these actors' performances, they're all doing them. You know, they're all bringing what they bring to the position, and I think, you know, it's how you can tell outstanding casting is that they're really doing what you want them to be doing.
Yeah, and I think Veronica Cartwright's character does, similar to Bill Paxton's character actually in part 2, he brings that panic that actually the rest of these characters in their professionalism or in their kind of stoicness don't actually have. So she's kind of our surrogate in a way, because she's going, oh my God, what the fuck is going on, you know?
Oh my God, and the bit where we see Tom Skerritt meet his end, and you've got Veronica Cartwright, right, go.
So good. Well, that's it. She really brings that drama so much more, because the rest of them are fairly subdued, even in their panic, in the most panic moments, aren't they?
And it just gets so quiet. The quiet in this film is as present as the sound. It's and she's kind of the only one who goes hysterical ever, isn't she? She brings the hysteria to the yard.
Exactly.
But you know what? Then as well, I think at the time, you know, there weren't a lot of female characters like Ripley. I think you were bound to get a hysterical woman as a foil. Yeah. And I think, you know, as I said, Veronica Cartwright, gonna Veronica Cartwright, you know, she brings it. Totally. So it's good it was her.
And again, it's so interesting to look at this film in isolation, and, you know, whether or not Ripley was written as a man or just as a person without, you know, that you can tell, especially then in comparison to the sequels, where so much of her storyline in the sequels, and for better or worse, is about her gender. Like, so much of it is about her being a mother to Newt, or literally a mother in the third one, and like it plays a lot more into it, I think, doesn't it, in the sequels? Whereas, again, in this first one, it's like there is nothing of that, you know.
Well, exactly. And there's no, you know, you've got a little bit with her being a caretaker for Jonesy, but actually there's no point where she goes out of her way to protect him for reasons that don't make sense for her own safety as well.
Yeah.
They need to catch him because otherwise they're going to be tracking him all the time instead of the alien, and this is what she's trying to avoid. So it's really justified.
She's super practical, isn't she? Like, she's the most practical.
I love that.
This is why she prevails over everyone else, because she doesn't get over emotional or anything else. She's like, this is what we need to do, let's just do it and get on with it. Kind of tells the rest of them to shut the fuck up, you know?
Well, exactly, which is early Blueprint final girlism, you know. She's running out the door instead of up the stairs. Like, it's all that kind of good stuff.
We'll proceed with Dallas's plan.
What? And end up like the others? No, you're out of your mind.
You got a better idea?
You know, and again, talking about the script and the directing, I think probably one of the best bits of directing in this is after she sets the Nostromo to detonate, to self-destruct, and she runs to the escape pod, sees the cat, realizes that the alien is stalking the cat, and she can't go past it, so she has to run back and turn the timer off. But that doesn't work. The timer's already gone on for too long, so she has to run back again. Thank God the alien's gone. Might as well grab Jonesy because he's still there and didn't get eaten. Let's get on the escape pod. Nobody says that. Nobody explains it. But it's so clear visually what's going on.
100%.
And it's about 10 or 12 minutes of the film, and it's running back and forth, and there's no dialogue, and it's just, you know...
It's that 10-minute countdown. It's that 10-minute countdown, isn't it, that literally happens in real time, and it is, like, it's intense. It's really good.
It is, and that, to me, is you know, that's the directing, because there's no dialogue there to help him. We're in the same spaces twice. You know, the actor has very little that she can do to create aspects of the scene. That's where he directed the hell out of it, is those moments where everything else is in the background and you're just in the film.
Hello everybody, that's a little snippet from one of my favourite horror movie themes to one of my favourite Italian horror films, Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters, aka Zombie, aka Zombie 2, from 1979. An incredible movie, one that we actually discussed a couple of years back on our zombie series, but I was playing a little clip of it as a little teaser of what we've got going on over on Patreon in the next couple of weeks, because on Patreon this summer we did a huge poll where we asked every single Patreon subscriber at the time to submit their top 10 horror movies of all time. So over 700 of you submitted your lists of 10 movies. We have collated them all thanks to friend of the pod Rebecca McCallum, who did an incredible job collating every single list. She worked out a point system, and we have come up with the final list of the top 50 horror movies of all time as voted for by patrons. So we're going to be bringing you a 2-part special, and this will be available for $5 patrons and upwards, where we count down that top 50 list. It's going to be split into 2 parts, and next week we're going to be bringing you the first half of this countdown. We're going to be counting down from numbers 50 through to 26, and then in a couple of weeks' time we will do the final 25. Now, spoiler alert, somewhere on that first half of the top 50 is Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters, which I'm so pleased about. I'm so glad it made it into the top 50. There was a lot of love for Zombie Flesh Eaters. And of course, spoiler alert, Ridley Scott's Alien is also very high on your list. If you want to hear what Evolution of Horror Patreon subscribers and Evolution of Horror Patreon contributors, I asked a load of friends of the pod to also submit their top 10 lists. If you want to hear what they voted as the 50 greatest horror movies of all time, then sign up now. Patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. If you sign up at a $5 level, you will get access to those episodes, as well as a whole bunch of other bonus episodes, and new $5 episodes drop every other week. You can also sign up at a $10 level, which will get you a new episode every single week, because you'll also get access to our exclusive mini-seasons, including our Hitchcock mini-season, our Hellraiser mini-season, and a whole bunch of others. Patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. Everybody who signs up from the UK will get sent an Evolution of Horror sticker, and everybody who signs up, no matter where you're from or what tier you sign up to, will get a very special shout out on the podcast as a thank you. Speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up in the last couple of weeks a very special thank you. So a big thanks to Tanya, Jake Tong, Laura Bainbridge Hattersley, Katrina Marsh, Jonathan Pratt, Chloe Thorpe, Kieran, Rowan Wilkie, Charles Thornton, Thornton III, Clemens Luer, Lisa Price, Tim G, Kenneth McRae, Jem Seddon, Strumpf Noir, Eric Bridle, Megan Holt, Philip Babcock, Anne Wilkie, Thomas Lipple, Stuart Spark, Oslo, Veronica O, Kim Newdorf, Pam Nail, Corey Martin, Ryan Kors, Nicole, Ethan Duran, M. Rabber, Russell Osborne, Slim is Chillin', Margaret Noonan, Paul Gibson, Alexander Smith, Brian Merica, Joni Stonestreet, Braden Benham, Matt Farber, Matthew Aiken, and Jason Bowden. A huge thank you to all of those people for signing up in the last couple of weeks. And one more time, if you want to join them and get treated to regular bonus content to listen to, then sign up now. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. Okay, let's return to the second half of my discussion with Jen Handorf as we continue talking all things Alien.
Alien life form. Looks like it's been dead a long time. Fossilized. Looks like it's grown out of the chair.
Jen, I can't believe we've been talking about Alien for nearly an hour and we haven't actually mentioned the alien yet.
It's Jaws. It's the Bruce.
It's because it's
you
incredible.
don't see it until how long? It's so long into the film.
It's so long. We're like way into what feels like about halfway into the film. Okay, so eventually they get that distress signal and they decide to land on the planet LV-426. Oh my God, this is one of my favourite moments. Because it's so weird and it's so creepy. And again, talking about this film in isolation, ignoring the prequels, we don't know what the fuck is going on this planet and this ship, this weird big alien thing that's on that chair, the space jockey, the eggs. Oh, what I mean, like, this is an incredible sequence, isn't it?
Well, and there were a couple of little reasons it looked the way it did that I really like. That the large space jockey is referencing like not old, but at the time, French comic books and all this kind of it's referencing images from the science fiction of that world.
Oh, amazing.
But then, and again, I don't know how much of this is apocryphal because you hear all these stories now. Apparently, the egg chamber. That the smoke was there, and it's described in the script as having a layer of smoke that reacts.
That's right.
And they got in there and they're trying to figure out how to make the layer of smoke that looks like it reacts. And the Who were testing a load of lasers in the studio next door.
No way.
And that they just decided to use the Who's. I don't know who had that conversation or how that went, but apparently that's why it came into play in that scene. And so Dan and I were debating this. As cool as it looks, it super just looks like a laser pointing across the floor to me. Like it will never not just look like a laser pointing across the floor with some smoke. Like I expect Catherine Zeta-Jones to scoot her butt underneath it and just barely get out the other side. Like it doesn't seem like anything other than that. But still fun, like still great
cool.
looking. So who cares?
It's so cool, isn't it? And maybe this is the time when we should talk a little bit about Giger, H.R. Giger, the artist who designed this film, essentially, right? That space jockey, that ship, of course, the actual alien itself, the face hugger, the xenomorph, which we'll get into. All of that was from his brain, right? He did an incredible job. Everything kind of looks futuristic and glossy and shiny like you'd get in a sci-fi, but it also looks gothic and shadowy and expressionist and scary. It also looks like parts of the human anatomy, right? Most importantly, genitals. It looks frightening and intimidating,
Intimidating, I think, is the right word. And this is somewhere where the film really digresses from its predecessors like Star Wars or 2001, is it goes into a much more organic design for the ships.
Yes.
Yes. And Giger is the emperor of organic design. If you're not familiar, it's just penises and vaginas, just all the time. It's meant to look like them. It's not just you. It's loads of penises and vaginas, and that's okay. But part of me though, again, because we talk about Ridley Scott as a filter, part of me wonders, like when he realized, like if he's on set, just like leaning over to the first AD, like, does the alien look like a big penis to you?
Yeah.
like did he not know? True. Because again, in the second film, there. Obvious. We've got much more of the mother, much more of the, procreation, much more of all of that.
Yes.
But
yes.
it's not until then, in retrospect, that it really comes to the foreground. So how much of this stuff was actually being snuck through?
Exactly. But it's just so wonderful because, again, I think that's what really gives it the horror edge, is that it looks organic, like you said. It's that Cronenbergian thing of everything looks a bit like flesh or the body in some way.
Yeah.
It reminds you of the body, and that is what stops it from being sterile sci-fi in the way 2001 might be, for example.
Absolutely. I like that. Maybe that's why it's so wet. Maybe that's why space is wet.
It's so squishy and wet.
No,
exactly.
Space is wet.
Oh God! And this is what really terrifies me. More than the fully grown xenomorph, the face huggers, Jen. I can't handle
the way that it tightens around, like it goes to the same shot of it tightening around the throat like 2 or 3 times.
Oh, and it's so frightening.
In Independence Day when they have the thing talk against the window, and it like that. Like, I'm obviously traumatized by Alien because it reminds me, like, that moment in Independence Day drew me back to that, and it was just.
Oh no, I can't handle it. The moment when the egg first opens and John Hurt can kind of see it moving first of all in the light. There's something alive in there. Oh, it's so good. And then leaping at his face, and like you say, the way it's just the idea of this little scuttling thing that just leaps at you and impregnates you through the mouth, down the throat. It's just horrible, isn't it?
It's like the thing you wouldn't want to find in your Airbnb. It's like the thing you're really frightened when you turn the lights on in the kitchen has just disappeared under the table. It's like a rat mouse.
Yeah, exactly. A rat mouse is a perfect way to put it. Like, I was talking with someone else about this.
No, cockroach rat. I didn't mean it that way.
Cock rat.
It's a cock rat.
I mean, it goes with the Geiger
a rat
theme
roach.
in a way.
A rat roach.
A rat roach. But no, I think, it feels like it taps in the design of this alien to everything we are all afraid of, Absolutely. It looks a bit like a spider, but it also has like a snake. It also has like a rodent tail.
Beetle shell, like the shiny beetle shell.
Yeah, the shiny. It's kind of, again, wet and goopy in places and shiny as well. Obviously, it looks like a penis at times. Often there's a vagina thing and the face hugger as well. It's like every inch of it is designed to terrify us, it feels like, It
really
horrible.
is. Well, and the as you say, like the spider elements, it's all very uncanny. So one of the things that triggers fear is uncanniness, and one of the reasons we don't like spiders is because they don't move with muscles. They basically move with pneumatics, where they're pushing fluid through their limbs to make their limbs move, which is why that looks weird to us, because it's not muscles contracting, it's pneumatics. And so they used a lot of these same designs when creating, as you say, like the face hugger. Oh man, and I love the acid blood. Like, that is such a good solution. Like, as a writer or as a creative, it's like, well, make it acid.
Oh my God. And again, this movie, not talking about the sequels yet, they don't kill it, right? I mean, they flush it out of an airlock, but nobody can actually kill it. It's basically an unkillable thing at this point in this first film.
Cockroach, exactly. Yeah, it cannot be dead. I had a very little bit of a silly image in my head at the end of this time of just the alien sort of floating through space, like indefinitely.
Yeah, just being like
a very little bit bored.
Yeah.
Exactly. Really wish I brought a book. Like,
exactly. Yes, it's so true. So this alien, it hatches from the egg, it leaps at Kane's face. The next thing we see, Kane is brought onto the ship unconscious, right? And they're trying to figure out what to do with it, how to get this horrible face hugger off. And like you said, whenever they try and remove it, it tightens its grip around the throat. Like you said, it's got acid blood. It's such a cool idea. So they try cutting into it, and it's a really cool sequence, isn't it? Where this acid, this corrosive liquid drips through, I think, 3 floors of the ship. Basically, telling us in a very simple visual way, this thing is basically unkillable.
Don't say anything like that except molecular acid.
Must be using it for blood.
It's got a wonderful defense mechanism. You don't dare kill it.
I love it. It's so good. And it's the idea that it's not doing anything to be aggressive towards them at that point. Obviously, it's, laying its eggs in their comrade, but it's not hurting them. It's just keeping them from hurting it by being by mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
That if they kill it, it will kill them.
Yeah. It's a defense, exactly, just a defense mechanism. And also, it's not, at this point, they're like, what's it doing? It's not doing anything. It's actually keeping John Hurt's character alive. It's like pumping air into him. He's in a coma, but he's still alive. He's, again, covered in sweat, isn't he? But no one at this point, with no prior knowledge, knows exactly what the alien is doing or what its plan is at this point, right? And it's horrible.
Well, and again, I love Ian Holm's casting here, but because we trust him.
Yeah,
because he's the doctor, and he's got this like kindly, sincere face that we're just like, well, he's saying this is what we're supposed to do, so obviously we trust him.
Yeah, and that whole argument he has with Ripley says don't let them in because of the quarantine, and he does. And even though he there is going against the rules, you kind of feel like he's got a bit more humanity in a way than Ripley does, because he's like, well, I wasn't going to leave these human beings in need out, like obviously that's not what his plan is.
Not his plan. Yeah, and this is where Dan O'Bannon smashes it again, is just by giving us these displays to let us think these things about the characters when actually he's going to twist it around on us later.
You also forgot the Science Division's basic quarantine law.
No, that I didn't forget.
Oh, I see. You just broke it.
Huh? Look, what would you have done with Kane? His only chance of survival was to get him in here.
Unfortunately, by breaking quarantine, you risk everybody's life.
Maybe I should have left him outside. Maybe I've jeopardized the rest of us, but it was a risk I was willing to take.
It's a pretty big risk for a science officer. It's not exactly out of the manual, is it?
And then, of course, later on, the facehugger has come off the face by itself, and John Hurt's awake, and it's like, oh, what's happened then? And again, a really terrifying moment when they realise it's no longer on his face, and they're like, where's it gone?
They leave the door open way too long, by the way. That whole scene, like they walk, it's got 2 seals on the door, and again, this is just the fact that we've been in lockdown for so long. My brain is like, that is horrific quarantine procedure. They've got a double door airlock. Ripley, they walk in. Ripley's just stood in the double door airlock and the doors aren't closing. I'm like, get in or get out. I can't afford to heat the whole space.
And no kind of armor. Like, I thought, if you've seen what this has just done to John Hurt, would you just wander around with a flashlight? Just like, well, let's have a look then. Where is it? Like, but it's just that whole sequence reminds me of that sort of like you said, when there's something in your Airbnb, when there's like, I've been in so many London flats where it's like, there's a rat in this room, I can hear it moving, where am I gonna, where is it? You're kind of creeping around at night in your underwear with a tennis racket or something.
Exactly. Well, and I love too how the torches that they have are these sort of very long, skinny torches, and they very much remind me of like bug sprayers, like where people like sort of insecticide.
Yeah, you're so right. Yeah.
And again, it feels like maybe nobody thought about that, but also knowing these production designers, that these are the kind of looks they were giving things without necessarily having permission or guidance, which is really great.
Yeah, well, again, they're going for that kind of almost 50s them like giant bug movie type vibe at times as well, because there is something of a kind of exoskeleton insectoidness about them when they're big as well, isn't there? Like you say, the kind of shiny shell and everything. Yeah,
it's so true. And I think that is another place where it's really to Scott's credit that this doesn't look like a B movie, and it's the fact that he did all of these really high production value commercials, and he was used to having things have a polished look, that if it had gone to Corman, I don't think it would be what it is now.
No.
It's the fact that it got put through this shiny, glossy filter. That really made it work.
Yeah, and it's the classic thing as well, isn't it? Of like, okay, maybe the alien costume looks a bit hokey, but we'll light it and reveal as little of it as possible. Again, kind of similar to Jaws in a way, right? I think Ridley Scott knew just how much to reveal. And I know that now, especially when you watch it in the 4K, you can see that at times the xenomorph is just a person in a suit. But I think Ridley Scott is very good at kind of keeping it in the shadows, only showing you bits of it as and when,
I do think as well, it had never bothered me before this rewatch that the xenomorph goes from being like the first, like the sort of foot-high chest burster to like all of a suddenly bigger than a full-grown man.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, you know, Harry Dean Stanton was on some growth hormones or something if one meal made it. Well, no, it was before that it gets that big, isn't it? It's before he eats Harry Dean. So it just goes from chestburster to massive. Yeah,
because it literally, he finds the shedded skin, like the snake skin, and then suddenly it's huge, isn't it? So let's talk about the chestburster scene. I mean, you mentioned it briefly already. You know, so many myths about this, about what they did and didn't know, you know. But I still think it's an incredibly powerful and such a well-staged scene, isn't it? Again, starting off with that very naturalistic, kind of like the first scene where they're all sat around having their, you know, breakfast. It's a similar thing. They're having dinner.
The first thing that I'm going to do when I get back is to get some decent food.
I can dig it, man.
And we're all talking over each other. Everything feels very natural. It feels calm. You don't feel like anything is going to happen at this particular scene. It isn't set up like a horror scene, is it? Until John Hurt suddenly starts coughing, and it just feels so real the way that it escalates. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's like watching somebody choke in a restaurant or something. Like it feels very much like a situation we could find familiar, and then it perverts into something that is just unexpected for everyone. You know, again, wonderful screen structure. We've seen the scene. We're familiar with it. It has a sense of calm for us and reestablishing the status quo. Yeah. And then it just completely throws us out the window. And it's, you know, I think it's ridiculous looking, but it scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, it is ridiculous looking. This is when when that little penis comes out and it makes that little...
It's effective, and it just shows you that, you know, if you keep the world consistent and you shoot it the right way and the sound design works with it, you can make it work even if it is a bit campy and B-movie in its style. You can elevate it to not be that as well.
And I think the performances make it all feel so good because... Again, this is probably why people all say, they were genuinely this scared. I'm sure they weren't. I think they were doing an amazing job, but it feels like a real natural moment. The panic, the way that all of them react. Some of them kind of, you know, one of them says, "Don't touch it," and different people react in different ways. Lambert's just screaming and crying, and they're kind of like confused. And again, John Hurt and his extreme kind of the pain of it as well. Like all of the performances sell the horror of what is happening, I think, so well as well, don't they?
They're all working as their individual characters.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it wasn't just, okay, look, panicked now, and they were all panicked. It was each of them was responding as their own internal story would respond.
Yes.
And that's awesome. It's why it works.
Yeah, so good. And you're right, as silly as it looks when it then scuttles off. But this is it now, isn't it? Now we're like, oh, okay, for the rest of the film, this is the film we're in now. Somewhere on this ship is this horrible fucking alien, and we don't know where it is. And there's a lot for the rest of the film now, isn't there, of just like creeping around with torches, using their little motion detectors, all of these brilliant little cinematic tricks to figure out like where is this thing going to pop out from next, you know?
Well, and I love the total MacGuffin of the motion detector because it doesn't even work. No. And then you realize that Ash has probably built it on purpose to not work.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. Like it's really good storytelling when you can have a little, you know, offshoot like that has no narrative impact because it was a lie.
Yeah.
But we still enjoy going on that journey.
It's incredible, isn't it? I think, you know, from this point onwards, we're about an hour into the film. This final half of the movie now, we're in slasher movie territory, right? We go down from 6 characters down to 1 with a final girl left. The monster picks them off one by one. It's very simple, it's very generic in a lot of ways, but it's done so well. We've already talked about the moment where Harry Dean Stanton dies with the creepy dripping and the chains and the cat. It's beautifully done. But I also love, you know, one of the most iconic jump scares, aside from the chestburster, is that kind of motion detector scene where Dallas is in the air vents and it's right above him. What an incredible jump scare.
Dallas?
I did absolutely scream on that one, and that one made me scream as well. I love this bit, except I feel like it really loses its momentum when it gets down to Yaphet Kotto and Veronica Cartwright. It's like it's got a thing going, it's going, and then
I know. It was almost like they'd run out of ways to kill off people. They were like, what can we do now with these two?
Just kill them.
Yeah.
I think it eats them, and then it eats. That was Dan O'Bannon just got tired at that. He was like, and then the alien eats them.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, we need to get to the point where she's on her own now. Yeah. So that was going to be my question for you. Is it eating them? Is that its purpose? Is it eating humans, or is it just killing them?
It's a good question, because we know from the future films that it's harvesting them to lay eggs and this and that.
It kind of uses human bodies to reproduce, but
didn't they say that the body? I think in this one we do hear that the body's disappearing with no blood.
Yeah, and there is a moment, and I think this is in the director's cut and not the theatrical, where Ripley finds all of the crew cocooned. They're like
that is in the director's cut. They obviously they shot it at the time. So. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It becomes part of the story if it's the director's cut. But if it's not the director's cut, it's not established yet. I think it must be. I think they must be cocooning them, because it is what the rest of the series supports, and it is what was written for additional scenes in the script.
Yeah.
So
it's very much focusing, isn't it, on the kind of the teeth, the double set of teeth that the alien has as well from this point onwards, and how it kind of attacks them using its mouth, using its teeth.
Is the only blood then in the chestburster scene?
I think it is. I don't think there is any other blood in the film.
That's exciting. And because the other thing, there's a lot. So there's spit, there's alien blood, and there's regular blood. But it's just a lot of drooling from the alien later.
Yeah, and it looks shiny, doesn't it?
Quite viscous.
Very viscousy. Yeah. And then speaking of fluid, we've also got Ash being revealed as the android.
Oh my god. That's always bugged me, and I feel like I can smell his blood. Like it's like when you break open certain plants and they've got that kind of milky sap that's got like just a sort of metallic stench to it.
Yes.
And I don't know why, but immediately that's where my mind goes for his weird not semen sweat.
Yes, not semen sweat. It's a horrible, because again, they've made a choice there not to have him just filled with wires. It's like, it's very organic again, isn't it? It makes it so much more scary, I think, that moment.
And again, it seems like technically, like if someone was going to describe it to you, it does look like it was built on hydraulics again, that it's using the fluid to create hydraulic movement, and that's the science behind his mechanisms.
Yes.
It was interesting on this go watching it and seeing how he acted when he was alone in a room, and then how he acted once he knew he had been discovered to be an android.
Yes.
And seeing that the filmmakers very clearly decided, the actor and the director very clearly decided that he was just going to act like a human until they caught him out, no matter who was watching, because there's not really any tips or tricks, I think. And I'm sure there's people out there who have had discussions about, but if you look in this scene at this moment, then there's this thing, da-da-da-da, and that point. I don't think there is.
No,
I think there's no indication on purpose until it's revealed that he's sweating weird rubber tree blood.
Totally. And this is the one scene really that kind of reveals, in some ways, who the real villains are of this whole franchise going forward, right? Which is the company.
Absolutely.
And, there is this feeling, we talked a bit about this when we talked about, in this series, about things like Invasion of the Body Snatchers and other movies of the 70s that really have that kind of post-Vietnam, post-Watergate vibe of like, you cannot trust government, companies, the man, exactly. And again, this movie comes back to that ultimately, doesn't it? I think that this robot represents the kind of the man, the company, the authority and everything else. In some ways scarier than the alien,
Well, yeah, and it's the ship is called Mother.
Yeah.
And they're trying to get the information from Mother to find out what Mother's hiding. And I feel like I don't think that's any further into the Geiger stuff. I think it's a manipulation of an authority figure, that title. I don't think it goes into the sex side of it as much as you're talking about, like the more what you're talking about, rather the authority of the word mother and what that means.
Yeah.
And then Ash makes a lot of sense as the sort of father figure, as the the healer, like that kind of thing. But then we still don't know who told them to do this, how big the bad guy is who told them to do this, and we know that she's going back to a world where they still exist.
Yeah.
So it's the alien isn't at all the villain of the film. Ash is 100% the villain of the film. The alien is really just it's just aliening.
It's just doing what it's doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And I do think that the way he attacks, I mean, like, this is another thing that we didn't really mention, but something that I'm sure so many scholars have written about. I think I've heard Mark Kermode talk about how what makes this film so scary is that it's about invasion of our body, right? And I think Kermode has talked at length about the John Hurt sequence being basically a scene about male rape and fear of male rape / male birth and all this kind of thing. But there's something of that too to the way that he tries to kill Ripley, because he rolls up what I think is a porn mag and shoves it in her mouth. Yeah, like what? Why choose that method to kill a human being?
That felt so weird. That felt odd, and it's something, it gets referenced in other things, like Archer does a spoof of it and this kind of stuff. It is an odd choice. I'm not sure, do we know whose bunk that is? It feels like maybe Yaphet Kotto's or Harry Dean Stanton's bunk.
Maybe, because there's Harry Dean Stanton's bunk has got all of it's got all of like the boob pics and everything.
There you go.
Wall.
I think it's his bunk that she's like strangling, or that they're fighting in.
Yeah.
And it's just because it's not, it is a weirdly like invasive, also not a way you would typically imagine would kill somebody.
No,
like,
and also probably not the sort of thing that an android would think of first, is it? Like, it's a very strange thing, but it's really horrible, you know?
Yeah, and it's one of those things that when you go back and you look at the movie, it's clear that not everything was a finely harnessed, polished choice, that some things just went into it and stayed there and nobody ever questioned, because that's the way they were. And now it can be retconned for days.
Absolutely. And maybe also they just thought, what's the kind of I don't know, grossest, creepiest, most invasive thing we could do in this scene of how he attacks her. I don't know, but it's a horrible moment, you know?
It's also the way a lot of fight coordinating goes is the fight coordinator will come into the space and then look in the space for weapons that exist.
Yeah.
So it might have been something that evolved from that conversation.
Yeah.
And then because it looks cool, it feels like there's more symbolism to it than that.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose, of course, it does mirror the face hugger's MO, right? That it's going to kill you by invading you through your mouth. But it's a very strange scene. It's a scene that I always actually forget about, you know? Every time I get to the Ash reveal scene and the fight with the robot, I'm always like, oh yeah, this is in this film.
I feel like there's so many moments I forgot and that's what I mean about the mythology sort of overtakes it, and you really forget, like, it really smooths over all these little scenes and these incidents in the film. Like, there's that fantastic pod room where they're communicating with Mother, first Tom Skerritt's character and then Sigourney Weaver, and it could not be more awesome. It's just like, why are there so many lights? Why do they have so many buttons in this room? They're clearly not labeled and unnecessary, but it looks spectacular.
Yeah, it really does.
And it's honestly, if you had shown me the bit of it with Tom Skerritt instead of Sigourney Weaver, I would have maybe thought it was from 2001. Like, it
100%.
Looks like could have been on the same ship type things.
Yeah, it looks like the same set, doesn't it? It's beautiful.
Oh, so delicious. So delicious.
So yeah, they all get picked off, and then we're left with that incredible final act. That's, again, like you said, it's quite a big chunk of the film that is just Ripley, Alien, and the cat as well, and Jonesy, but like the whole self-destruction sequence where the lights are flashing and it's really kind of amps up, and then we get onto the escape shuttle, and it's a pretty cracking final act, I think, isn't it, of this film?
And again, for something where we're looking at working class characters and the trucker element of it, I love the sort of computer says no moment of she goes back to stop it and she's trying to push them down to get it to go a little bit faster, and then it's like seconds away.
Yeah.
It just, like, literally moments from working it. And I feel like anyone who's had an office job has had that encounter with a printer or a Xerox machine or like Norton antivirus scans.
It's so true.
But I think, you know, it's so very human, those kind of moments. And then she gets to save the cat as well, which is, although she does super just chuck it onto the ship.
I know.
She straps herself in to survive this, quite frankly, appalling rendering of the ship exploding. It's one of the only bits of the film that visually lets it down, is the sort of very comic book styled explosion.
Very, I know, it's hilarious.
Doesn't really look like much of anything other than some like colorful egg. But yeah, I love that she straps herself in and, you know, is going at multiple G's or whatever as she's pushed back into her chair. Meanwhile, Jonesy, in his cat carrier, is just being gravity slammed at the back of the ship.
I know.
I'd say too that escape pod definitely had room for 4 people in it.
100%, yeah.
I love that they're like, well, there's not room for 4 in the escape pod. It's like, I mean, like, how much personal space do you need?
I know. All I could assume was that maybe they meant supplies-wise there's not enough, or oxygen-wise maybe there's not enough or something.
Right.
But yeah, it's a big shuttle. It's big.
It's quite sizable. It's
so
not
big,
small.
in fact, that she doesn't notice that the alien follows her on there as well. And this is such a scary scene, I think, as well, when she realises that it's just there and it's kind of just like lying on its side in like a cupboard or something. I'm like,
but it's
whoa,
like it's like the rat roach. We're back to the rat roach moment where you think you've squished it or you've gotten them all out, and then you open the cupboard and they're just like in the little bit of the cupboard, ready to come out and defile your domestic space.
It's horrible. But like, I'm always a bit like, why isn't it just jumping out and attacking her? Like, it's hiding, isn't it? For some reason, it's biding its time, and it's like, I'm always surprised as to why it isn't just killing her, basically. I mean, apart from the fact that
I'm
the
with
plot
you on that
demands
one.
it.
Yeah, no, I'm super with you on that one. I had thoughts about maybe it was injured and so it's hiding, but you're not wrong. It is one of those places that it doesn't really give us enough of a reason for it not to attack her.
I guess, you know, again, like you said, taking the first film only in isolation, it is a creature that only ever hides in dark corners and only sort of attacks when the opportunity is there for it. It doesn't just like waltz about killing people, maybe in the way that they do in the second one.
It's not really stalking people as much in the later. Yeah, in the later ones it's a hunter. In this one it's much more like defending itself in the dark kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not really doing anything on the ship, really, is it? Other like it doesn't. It's not like tearing up the ship or drooling acid and making the ship broken. Like, they really could have just shut it off in part of the ship and left it all out.
Yeah, it finds somewhere to hide and then it just stays there, doesn't it, basically, which is horrible, terrifying. But yeah, it's a really great final sequence, because I love the kind of, again, Sigourney Weaver, you can see the panic in her eyes, but also she doesn't do the over-the-top panicking. She, like, quietly, methodically, like, straps herself in. She knows exactly what she has to do, but there's that sheer panic of, like, please don't kill me while I'm doing this, you know? And it's like, it's really good sequence, very good.
Absolutely. Well, and the bit where she's getting into the emergency spacesuit, which we saw in the first introduction of the first introducing frames of the film, which is funny. But she's getting into the spacesuit, and the way that she's like staring at the alien, I think there's a small glass barrier between them. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's again speaking to her performances, and I'm just going to go to the film Copycat again because I think it's an amazing, scary, brilliant film.
So good.
There's a bit in that she's an agoraphobic a professor who studies serial killers, and she's trying to get out of her flat when the serial killer's in the flat, and the performance is so, like, the energy is so spot on in both of those scenes. You just, her ability to bring that kind of fear to her characters is really spectacular.
So good. It's just such a panic-inducing kind of final sequence, isn't it?
Well, but it's so easy to watch some of these characters. Like, you think about Scream franchises and Know What You Do About Summer franchises and that kind of thing. Yeah. And, you know, Sarah Michelle Gellar doesn't make you feel afraid. You feel delighted that she's afraid, but her fear doesn't make you experience fear. Yeah. Sigourney Weaver makes you frightened with her.
So
like,
true.
You feel it with her. Like, you're there empathizing the whole way. And I do think that's one of the reasons why it's such a successful character is because we empathize with Ripley the whole way. We don't hate Ripley. We feel like everyone else hates her.
Yeah.
It's all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. You're right. And she's human. She does get scared. She does panic, as good as she is at her job. She's not just this like, big, tough, like warrior-like character. She's human as well. That's the thing. Yeah.
Exactly. She's got all of those dimensions that we love so much.
Yeah. And there you go. And again, it's like done. Flush it out the airlock. The film basically then ends immediately after that, right? And again, it just, like we said at the very beginning, just how simple this film is. That it's like alien gets on the ship, each person dies, one person left, the end. And that's all we get, and it's lovely. And we don't learn anything more about the alien. We don't learn anything more about this company, this world. It's like, that's it, And
I'm not even sure that Ripley has really changed as a character. Like, I think she's the same character she was at the beginning, really. It's a much more B-movie structure. It's a B-movie with an A-movie polish. It's absolutely... And I think that juxtaposition and the way that you get the commercial and the artistic and the B-movie and the blockbuster and all of that coming together in it is, again, what just makes it feel so special.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder that if Killer Clowns had been directed by Ridley Scott, would we be having...
Oh my God, maybe. That's
Who
the
knows?
thing. Who knows? And so there you go. And the film, obviously... was a huge success box office wise. I think critically initially a lot of people were snooty about it, and then it's been one of those films that people have sort of come round to over time. But everyone flocked to see it. Of course they did. And I suppose in comparison to things like Close Encounters and Star Wars, it's like, oh, here's a really adult movie set in space, about aliens.
Well, and I think it was definitely scarier. It was in the same way, we talked about Carnival of Souls and Les Yeux Sans Visage at one point, and how those were films of an era that made films scarier.
Yeah.
And I do think that Alien allowed future films, they could set a bar for fear in a lot of ways and said, this is how scary we're going to make things in the cinema now.
Exactly. And I can't emphasize enough. We have this conversation so much on this podcast about, is it scary? Did it scare you? And is that the be-all and end-all of horror? Should all horror movies scare you? Is that, how you judge them? Blah, blah, blah. This film is terrifying. It's still as scary to me now as a 33-year-old as it was when I was a teenager. I think the design is terrifying of the monster. I think the direction is terrifying. I think the performances make it terrifying. I end up in a cold sweat watching this movie, like, as much as those characters do. And this is why I think it's kind of nonsense, this argument about, is it horror or is it sci-fi? Because apart from the fact that it's set in space and there is an android, this is a haunted house movie. This is a slasher movie. It's gothic. It's terrifying. It's horror from start to finish, right?
Yeah, it's like science fiction that went to horror university.
Exactly.
It's got so many tropes from science fiction comic books and B movies and all that kind of stuff, but then it's presented so terrifyingly that you can't deny the horror aspects of it.
Yeah, it's a killer working its way through bodies. It's gothic. It's even got a bit of like early example of found footage when they're all wandering around with their on the planet, with the little cameras and everything. It's great.
Oh my God! Speaking of that scene, how fogged up their helmets were, their visors were in it, because I wear glasses, and the glasses mask combo. I've been living through like fogged glasses for the last 2 years. Just like, I can't tell how they see anything.
Yeah. I know.
I think we're in an egg chamber. I don't know. I can't see. It's really steamy and it's really moist in here for some reason.
Exactly. Okay, well, that pretty much nearly wraps up Alien. In a minute, Jen, I want to ask you a little bit about your brief thoughts on all the sequels and prequels. But first of all, before we get to that, let's head over to this week's Wild About Horror segment, because I've no doubt that Freudian cinephile Mary Wild will have plenty to say on Ridley Scott's Alien.
Hey Mike, Mary Wild here, back for more Alien chat, and the time has come to pay tribute to Ridley Scott's Alien, a giant of science fiction horror cinema. We all know how this one goes. In deep space, crew members of the commercial starship Nostromo are in cryo sleep capsules. Halfway through the return journey, the ship's computer, Mother, awakens the crew after detecting a transmission from a nearby planetoid. They land, sustaining damage from the atmosphere and rocky landscape, and find a chamber containing hundreds of egg-like objects inside an alien ship. An organism leaps out and breaks through Kane's helmet, attaching itself to his face. Dallas and Lambert carry the unconscious Kane back to the Nostromo ship. As acting senior officer, Ripley refuses to let them aboard, citing quarantine regulations. But Ash overrides her decision and lets them inside. Something defining happens here. Ripley's authority is undermined by Ash. An opposition is suddenly fostered between them, unleashing a peculiar dynamic onto the ship, which I'll touch on in a bit. Kane awakens with some memory loss, but seems to be otherwise unharmed. During a final crew meal before returning to stasis, he suddenly chokes and convulses. A small alien creature bursts from Kane's chest, killing him instantly, and escapes into the ship. The xenomorph then systematically stalks and attacks the ship's crew. Ridley Scott chose not to show the full alien for the majority of the film, keeping most of his body in shadow to create a sense of terror and heightened suspense. Our worst fears as spectators are then activated by imagining what the rest of the creature might look like. Scott said, "Every moment is very slow, very graceful, and the alien alters shape so you never really know exactly what he looks like. I've never liked horror films before because in the end it's always been a man in a rubber suit. But the most important thing in a film of this type is not what you see, but the effect of what you think you saw." Ripley discovers that Ash is an android who's been secretly ordered by the company to bring the alien back to Earth. Ash was assigned to ensure the creature's survival. The crew was considered to be expendable. Ash expresses admiration for the creature's psychology, unhindered by conscience or morality, and taunts the crew about their chances of survival. I perceive this movie to be predicated precisely on this epic power struggle between human agency embodied by Ripley and the psychopathic schemes of a fraud, Ash, who remorselessly sabotages humanity. Ripley is honest, conscientious, and professional. She cares about the security of her colleagues and works to ensure their safe return home. Ash merely performs the superficial characteristics of a human being, even as he covertly betrays them and places them in harm's way. Ash being exposed as a plotting and pernicious automaton warrants the analysis that machines are inherently antagonistic to the human condition, but they rely on us for system upgrades. This reminds me of a passage from Marshall McLuhan's writings where he says, "Physiologically, man in the normal use of technology is perpetually modified by it, and in turn finds new ways of modifying his technology. Man becomes, as it were, the sex organs of the machine world, as the bee of the plant world, enabling it to fecundate and evolve ever newer forms." So in Alien, it becomes a tug of war between the erotic, i.e. life-giving properties of the human being, pitted against the austere, calculating features of the robot. The extraterrestrial is enabled to overthrow human consensus and solidarity, atomizing and alienating the crew members from each other, driving a fatal wedge between them. Of course, the mission had been invaded from the start by the commercial interests of Nostromo. The earlier concern about inadequate pay expressed by crew members now descends into an existential crisis and outright threat to life. Profit over people becomes the real alienating force here, in which human resources are chewed up and spat out, advancing the technological cause at all costs. What happens between Ripley and Ash brings to my mind a line from the beautiful speech delivered by Charlie Chaplin in The Great Dictator, in which he says, "Soldiers, don't give yourself to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. So, deceived by technology, derided by a machine man, Ripley does not give up. She has the courage to fight non-stop for her agency and human dignity. Ash's Nabokovian name, implying that the duplicitous bot is reduced to nothing whilst the human woman thrives, indicates the hopeful perspective of the film. H.R. Giger worked on aspects pertaining to the alien, which he designed to appear alive and biomechanical in contrast to the stark industrial look of the Nostromo. For the interior of the derelict spacecraft and egg chamber, Giger used dry bones with plaster to sculpt much of the scenery and elements. Veronica Cartwright described his sets as erotic, visceral, like you're going inside some sort of womb. It's impossible not to notice alien sexual overtones. Barbara Creed interpreted the plot in terms of the monstrous feminine as archaic mother. The uterine chamber of cryogenic pods, images of eggs, scenes of birth, narrow winding corridors like a vaginal canal, together create a complex network of female reproductive signifiers. The ship's life support system is even called Mother. Sigmund Freud would have loved it. The archaic mother, the pre-phallic creator of everything, is repressed in patriarchal ideology because of her parthenogenetic ability to conceive by herself without requiring a male partner. Alien evokes the cinematic awe and terror of a woman's independence, her tremendous generative power. It also triggers a collective fear of returning to the mother, to our origins. Ripley's triumph as the last survivor of Nostromo grants her final woman status. The narrative appears to align Ripley with the archaic mother's strength and intimidating discursive position. The facehugger's attack on Kane has been compared to a male rape, and the chestbuster scene suggested as a representation of violent birth. The alien's phallic head and piercing method of killing crew members add to the sexual mood of the film. Dan O'Bannon, who wrote the screenplay, argued that the infamous chestbuster moment is a metaphor for the male fear of penetration, and that the oral invasion of Kane by the facehugger functions as payback for the many horror films in which women are sexually assaulted by male monsters. David McKinty, author of Beautiful Monsters, the unofficial and unauthorized guide to the Alien and Predator films, claims that Alien is a rape movie as much as Straw Dogs, I Spit on Your Grave, or The Accused. On one level, it's about an intriguing alien threat. On another, it symbolizes parasitism and disease. And in terms of what was most important to the writers and director, it's about sex and reproduction by non-consensual means. It's about this happening to a man. He notes how the film plays on men's fear of pregnancy and childbirth, while also giving women a glimpse into male anxieties. O'Bannon himself later described the sexual imagery in Alien as overt and intentional, saying, "One thing that all people are disturbed about is sex. And I said, that's how I'm going to attack the audience. I'm going to attack them sexually. And I'm not going to go after the women in the audience. I'm going to attack the men. I am going to put in every image I can think of to make the men in the audience cross their legs. Homosexual oral rape, birth, the thing lays its eggs down your throat, the whole number." Well, gosh. I'll conclude this segment by saying that psychoanalysis shows that because of the unconscious, we are fundamentally aliens to ourselves. There are so many unknown aspects and uncharted waters, repressed memories, aggressive impulses, conflicting desires, shameful instincts, and secret dimensions to ourselves that we would rather not confront, both at an individual level and in wider society. This might explain the inclination in Ridley Scott's Alien to portray the extraterrestrial as hostile, malevolent, and threatening to human beings. It's simply an externalized manifestation in outer space of something going on internally at a psychological level. The process of working through these cinematic projections is a form of catharsis, serving to expunge psychic tension. Catch you on the next one.
A big thank you to the incredible Mary Wild. Don't forget, if you follow Mary on Twitter @PsychStar, you can find all her information there about any upcoming courses, about her podcasts and that kind of thing. And also Mary, of course, has a Patreon, which I am a member of, and I love listening to her bonus content over there. So you can support her there, patreon.com/Mary Wild. Okay, Jen, we've pretty much wrapped up with Alien, but before we finish this episode, I just want to ask you very briefly about everything that came after it. The sequels, the prequels, the crossovers with Predator. We are going to be covering some of these in depth on the podcast in the next couple of weeks, but just briefly, Jen, what are your thoughts on the rest of this series as a whole?
I love the first half of them. Since the reboots, I'm not really a fan. I've just never been able to engage with the Fassbinder ones. I think they're a different kind of film, which is not really an energy that I choose to vibe with all the time. Like I love Winona Ryder. I love like all the campness of the earlier ones. I think is fantastic. I'd love watching them a kabillion times, but then I don't think I'll ever watch Prometheus again. So confused. I
think Ridley Scott kind of really clearly is somebody that was more into the idea of the humans and the androids than he was the aliens in these movies, right? Because it feels like this is something he revisits again, even in Blade Runner, but also particularly in Prometheus. What is it to be human? What differentiates us from the androids, and all that kind of philosophical stuff that he's
the
really
very Philip K. Dick of it all. Yeah, yes. No, for sure. And it's apparently, because something we didn't talk that much about was how Walter Hill and Gordon Carroll got involved in the screenwriting for this as well.
Yeah.
But the android was an element that was added after Dan O'Bannon's original work, and so it's not surprising that you say that, really, because it wasn't really part of the initial conceit.
Yeah.
And it's I agree with you entirely, though. I think there's a large swath of filmmakers who feel like science fiction is about robots and humans.
Yeah.
And that's without saying that that's really only one tiny facet of it. But,
exactly. And I do love that it has that kind of the franchise, for better or worse, and everyone has their own thoughts on the sequels, but they are all very much their own thing. It's not like Friday the 13th, 6, 7, and 8, where they're kind of interchangeable. It's like, oh no, you've got James Cameron very much making a James Cameron film, and then you've got David Fincher making this really nihilistic kind of prison film, and then you've got the wacky French directors making the campy Winona Ryder one written by Joss Whedon and stuff, and they are very much all their own thing, aren't they? I think.
And you know what? I even have fun with the Predator ones. Like I actually would super order a pizza and some beer and sit and watch that with a load of friends. Like I think they're great fun, and I love the way that someone was just like, so the Predator's like a hunter, right? And then the alien's like the perfect prey, except I don't mean perfect prey, I mean invincible. So then you get, it's like the immovable force and the unstoppable force and the immovable wall. It's just I just love that happens. And of course it's camp. It's 100% camp.
Yeah.
But I think that's great. I love it.
Absolutely. I'm kind of excited because I'm going to be briefly covering the rest of them later on in the series.
Man.
And Sam Ashurst is joining me to talk about the Predator films as well. And I think
nice.
I'm quite excited to revisit some of these sequels and crossovers and everything, because they are fun. None of them are quite the terrifying trip that the original one is, though.
Well, exactly. And I think it's almost, as you say, because they're all so different. The first one is the scary one. That's what it does. That's its job. Simple and scary.
Yeah. Totally.
And boy, does it do it.
Exactly. So there you go. Jen, as ever, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us to discuss this movie. And just remind us, Jen, where can people find more of your stuff out there online and more information about anything you've got coming up?
So I am at Jen Handorf on Twitter, as always. I love chatting continuously on there if anybody wants to come have a speak. I'm hoping that by the next time we speak, I'll be able to talk about what I'm doing. At the moment, everything is like under contract, pending review, all of this kind of thing. So I don't want to jinx anything yet, but hopefully by the time I'm tweeting about this going up, I can say what we're up to as well.
Amazing. Perfect. Well, Jen, thank you so much for joining me.
Excellent, man. Thank you. Have a good one.
And there we go. That's it for this week. That's it for our Alien episode. And a huge thank you one more time to my brilliant guest, Jen Handorf. So, what do you guys think of this movie? It's a classic. Everyone talks about how it's one of the best and scariest horror movies ever made, right? Do you agree with that, or do you think it's a bit overrated? I would love to hear your thoughts. Please get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, and don't forget you can find us on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and there's also a discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and you can find that on Facebook. If you want to support this podcast, then sign up to our Patreon and get regular bonus episodes. Patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. You can find all previous seasons and episodes of this podcast on our website, evolutionofhorror.com. On our website, you'll also find our merch shop where you can pick up your own EOH hoodie or t-shirt, evolutionofhorror.com/shop. You can find this podcast on all the usual podcast places, and if you get a minute and haven't done so already, I would be so grateful if you could leave us a little rating and review on Apple Podcasts, which really helps us get discovered by new listeners. Okay, onwards to next week then, and we are going to stay in the world of the xenomorphs. Next week, I'm going to be joined by the Empire Podcast's very own Chris Hewitt, and we're mostly going to be discussing James Cameron's Aliens from 1986. Mostly. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.